live on YouTube. Now we will be going broadcasted with Zoom.
All right, and it's Monday. Welcome. Good afternoon to some. Good morning to some. Welcome to another week of Be Strong Families webinar series, Staying Strong and Positive for Ourselves and Our Children. We're so grateful that you are joining us today, and it's 12 o'clock on the nose, so we have folks coming in I see you joining from the participant list. As always, we'd love for you to pop in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from so we can give you a little shout out while we're kind of gathering here. And we got a very exciting topic. Let's move on. Actually, it's 12 o'clock, so let's move as people are joining, and then people can pop in the chat as they're ready. We are in class number 6, and this is Accessing Our Emotions, Exploring Rhythm, Time, and the Natural World, class 6 of Cycles of Awareness. And we're so grateful to welcome back Yoli, who's back again. Welcome, Yoli, welcome.
Yeah.
And I see folks popping in saying hello from Dallas and Tennessee and Western New York. I'm Guy Shingofi. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Be Strong Families, and I'm your host for this afternoon. Before we get into the mix, let's just talk about the ways we like to engage on this. And for those of you who have been on the webinar before, this is old hat for you, but mostly you're not going to be talking on the phone, but just in case, keep it on mute. And if there's an opportunity to raise your hand, this will be a more interactive session, so there may be chances for that. We'll unmute you, and then you can unmute yourself, and that'll help make sure the audio runs clean. Just be patient with us as we're kind of looking at all the activity on the chat and the question logs. But another great way to engage throughout is to type your comments in the chat. So there's the group chat option, and you just want to make sure that you click on the drop down that says your message is going to all panelists and attendees, and that way everyone can see your comments. Oh, and there's Robin from DeKalb. Welcome, Robin. So let's go to our agreements before we then pass the baton. So we always speak from our own experience for using I statements. The golden rule, treating other people the way you want to be treated. Every voice, every comment is valid, welcome, and valued. We really appreciate the connection and the contributions from everyone on the webinar, from the presenters to you on the line. And third agreement, full presence and just trying to reduce multitasking. So you've registered for this webinar, you've blocked out the time on your calendar for this hour. So give that hour to yourself, let everything go and stay with us for the next hour. And that's our other agreement. I see folks are popping in with their agrees. Thank you. And let me also make sure I welcome Dee Yin, who's helping and running the technology today. I hadn't done that prior. So looks like everyone is agreeing. So that's fantastic. And at that point, I'll pass it over to Yoli to get our program started.
Yay, thank you. So friends, welcome back. This is class 6 of 6, and in my imagination, I thought we only had 5 classes together in this series that we've been doing. So I was like, yes, bonus. What should we get into? So we've got a nice interactive session, because really I set out in this series in particular that we would have a combination of theory and practice, that and if anything, like a lot of practice. We've had a framework that we've established. We've been looking at grief and emotions and this just overall need to express our emotions as part of a cycle, right? That like the cycles happen, they initiate, and then they have their cyclic flow, whether it's a circle or a spiral or a figure eight, or think like how different waterways move, right? And sometimes it's racing rapids, and sometimes it's a slow, lazy river, and sometimes it's so slow it's an oxbow lake, until it's flood season. So, with that said, this topic has been what we've been doing is centering grief, and grief is one of the many essential human experiences. It's not just a mental experience. We experience grief in its physicality as well as a mental experience. Grief is also a deeply, deeply spiritual experience. So we are grief education deprived. I was just reflecting with a friend yesterday who recently lost her father in the last couple of weeks, and she's been working with a grief counselor, a bereavement counselor, and in this case, a traumatic bereavement counselor. And we were reflecting on how much educating is happening in their conversational format. And it really had me thinking about, like, yeah, we arrive to these places in life, these potent life experiences, such as big experiences of loss, right? Grief is not limited to just the death of loved ones. It's the experience of loss, right? Significant loss. And we're given no education in grieving. I like to think like way back in the day when we had, a more sort of tribal weave to a community. And I'm just thinking generically, nobody in particular in this sort of fantasy I'm thinking of. So many more things were role modeled for us. It was woven into life itself. And so it wouldn't, the experience of loss or the experience of the loss of a loved one, you would have been prepared from as soon as you could observe the world around you, like after 12 weeks of life, when everything wasn't just light and shadow, you could actually focus your eyes. After that, you're just learning and learning and learning. But what's happened over the generations is that grief has become a taboo, something that should not be experienced with others collectively, outwardly, expressively. And I think we can start to put it together nowadays that really is unhealthy. Now, we have a great deal of fear of grief, fear of experiencing pain, fear of experiencing suffering. And so that's why I really wanted to share with you in this whole series tools that could be used for grieving. They could also be used for emotional processing. They can also be used as like daily exercise, to keep the feels moving and cycling as we're acknowledging the cyclic nature of grief. When we engage the grief process, it doesn't mean that we're going to be in that heaviness forever. And I think that that's part of the fear. And so here's what we're going to do for this first half. I want to bring us into just a little bit of meditative awareness. I'd like to do a cyclic breathing exercise that's beautiful to do anytime, that connects us with the cycles of the seasons. Then I would like to introduce a resource, a favorite resource of mine, and this is the book Gather by Octavia Rahim. And I use the gems, the reflective gems in this book in so many of my classes. She's a strong Black femme, And she represents on the power of restfulness, but also just ancestry and ritual and the sacredness of life and the natural world. So I'd like to do a reflection from here. So you may like to have a little piece of paper close by and a writing utensil, so that we can do a little bit of call in, a little bit of breath, and I'll read a short reflection from here, and then there's a reflection question. And then if anybody feels called to share, we can call in. You can, pop in the chat some shares. Then I have a couple slides that I want to review because some of you have come for some of this series before. Some of you are just popping in today like, cool, Cycles of Awareness sounds cool, like let's rock and roll, so respect. So I wanted to review a couple things and then really just hit on today intergenerational inherited grief and just a little bit of framework to work with that. That'll be a new piece for us. And then I'd like to open the floor up for questions. So if you're already brewing questions, right? If there's things already, you can pop them in the chat, and then Guy, he's going to collect them for us and we'll have them there. I'll save some time for questions, and then we'll just kind of time manage on the back end. If we run out of questions, if we don't have more things to say, then we can come back around with another reflection and even a little relaxation. There's always practices we can do, so that's no problem. But in all of this series, I didn't entertain one question from any of you. So I wanted to make sure that we had that space today as well. So it's kind of like a wrap up and a review. And even if you came to none of the series from before, you're going to get a lot out of today, even just a restful experience. And all the recordings are there on the website, so you can go back through the catalog and start at 1 of 1 and take yourself all the way through. So that's the plan. So welcome. My name is Yoli Maya Ye, and I'm speaking to you today from the sacred lands of the 5 Great Lakes. This is the modern day city of Chicago, is built upon the wetlands of the Great Sacred Lake of Lake Michigan. And I am a person who identifies as a woman. My pronouns are she, her. And I am a multicultural, multilingual, multi-religious person. And I'm very in tune and intertwined with all my heritages, including my inherited Indigenous background, as well as being raised by very strong Black Indigenous women. And something I learned from my ancestors is land acknowledgement. The power of acknowledging the land that you are resting on, like your bones, and ultimately the land where your bones will come to rest when this journey in this body form is complete, right? And we as displaced peoples, right? We as peoples who know some of our ancestors, and many of our ancestors, we do not know their place origins. There is a strong connection in knowing the origins of your peoples. And in that is the strength of knowing where the bones of your ancestors rest. Now, it's not for everyone, but the technological arrival of DNA analysis could be, it depends on if it delights you or not, but it could be a fascinatingly delightful way to find out just simply this foundational need to know where the bones of your ancestors rest. Because we carry the imprint, we carry the information, knowledge passed down through our cellular structure, our DNA structure of our ancestors. And as we're going to explore today, we have also inherited, well, body shapes, body types, intonation, like voice, speech patterns, and stress patterns, and things we know about and things we don't know about, right? Things that we're aware of and patterns we're not aware of. As a body worker, as a healer, I even see in people's bodies postural, intergenerational postural patterns, right? So if you start kind of thinking about, like, yeah, everybody in such and such a family has this voice, they all have the same kind of quality of voice. Like, what is that? That is such a curious quality about being a human. How much we are connected to our ancestry, whether we know it or not, aware or not. So when we acknowledge the land and we just feel into the space where we are, where our bones are at this moment, we connect in to all the people that have walked this land before us, known and unknown. Right? And so I want to invite you into this little game if it delights you. Everything I'm going to share with you will always be invitational. If it works for you, awesome. If it doesn't work for you, you don't have to do it. And you are so welcome to adapt whatever we do in a way that works for you. Whether that's language, positioning, imagery, any of it. It's we're just playing together, really. So any position is cool. However you're finding yourself right now, if you're laying down, if you're seated in an office chair, if you're outside in the park, if you're like me, rocking the living room, just find a way to connect to this body, perhaps a breath to the belly. And then just as you are, whatever is connecting to the floor beneath you, a leg, a knee, a foot, maybe you're reclined, so it's more parts of the body that are connecting to the earth, as if you could extend little vines from those places that are connecting into the earth. Maybe you're in a high-rise apartment right now, so you got to go through a bunch of floors and some foundations. Yep, just head on down. You're just visualizing, imagining this, and just go all the way into the earth and then reach into the earth itself. And it's perfect earth. It's warm, it's moist. You can move these tendrils through that earth. You can feel it's perfect in its humidity. It's not too dry. It's not too hard. It's not too much clay. And just reach in and feel the richness and the connectivity of the earth as we acknowledge the ancestors of this land. And if it delights you, perhaps even calling them in to be co-conspirators in this adventure in healing as we explore an idea that grief could even be a superpower. And just let that sensation saturate you, and maybe you're even drawing up some of this earthly energy into the body and feeling like you're painting this. Lots of colors are possible, brown all the way to dark black earth. There's good red earth. There's shades of yellows and golds and mixes of sparkly minerals. However you'd like to see this, maybe it's just now saturating your entire body, from the tips of the toes to the crown of the head, to the tips of each of the fingers, and every space in between. And then I'd like to invite you to connect with a cycle of your breath. And if you like the eyes to be open, if you prefer the eyes to be closed, it doesn't matter. Whatever allows you to connect with your breath. And we're going to take a few rounds of the breath as cycles of the seasons. And so as you inhale the season of spring, where we find ourselves today. Unless, of course, you're hanging out in the southern hemisphere. That could be possible. And just feel that intake of fresh, light, upward, expansive energy. And then there's a space between the breaths. That's the fullness of summer, where the expansion is now in all directions, multi-directional expansion, joyousness of summer, fullness of summer. And then that's just followed by this cascade, this release, letting go of the autumn or fall season. Even the leaves of the trees letting go of their beautiful rainbow celebration. As we move into this pause in between the breaths. And that's the pause of winter. I mean, right now we're just emerging from our pauses of winter. I described I'm in a pretty north end of the northern hemisphere, and so yeah, it's like game on just today, as the emergence, a little bit warmer, a little bit expansion, right? So just take yourself through the cycles, seasons of the breath. The inhale, that is spring. The pause, that is summer, fullness. The exhale of autumn. And the pause, rejuvenative pause of winter. Now let yourself get lost in your rhythmic cycle of breath for a few rounds. The inhale, spring. Pause of fullness of summer. Exhaling, autumn. Pause, the rejuvenation of winter. Inhale, spring. Space of summer. Exhale, fall. Space of winter. Inhale, spring. Space of summer. Exhale, fall, space for winter. And breathing in, space. Breathing out, space. Take a few rounds until you hear a bell calling us back. How did that feel? If you have any thoughts or feels that you want to feel, pop them into the chat. This is a breath that you could do with children also, right? Just connecting in with the seasons and cycles. And lots of applications of this breath. You could choose different cycles. You could do like sun and moon. You could do moon cycles, 4 quarters of the moon. Like it's very easy to take this technique and just plug in other natural elements and then through this process of this cyclic breath. Now, what did you observe about the breath? Right? You'll see certain parts of the breath soften, lengthen, right? That the spaces between the breath will get longer. Who knows? Maybe you're still doing the breath right now. You're like, I don't know. I'm like in this right now, so I don't even know. I'm just going to be in this, right? And so part of the technique, the relaxation technique, when we're doing breath work, is when we want to de-escalate, when we want to bring an emotional experience that's way up the scale down, when we want to address pain and pain management, when we want to use breath to create a healing parasympathetic nervous system response. What all those techniques will include is a lengthening of the exhale. So whether you observed it now or another time where you do this breath or any other breath like it, observe for the point when your exhale lengthens. Some of you may already know this. This may be a new little tidbit trivia for others, that what we're also doing is mimicking what happens to your breath at the moment of falling asleep. That your exhale lengthens because your body's going into its rest and responsiveness, its stay and play, its rest and rejuvenation response. That's the opposite of the fight or flight, freeze response. So this is where the healing lives. So we also use techniques like this for insomnia, especially insomnia where you have trouble falling asleep. So you've got a focal point for the mind with the 4 seasons in this case, and then the focal point, the adjacent focal point of the breath. And then as the exhale, it'll naturally happen. Sometimes we do breath work where we use a count and we make that, we extend the count of the exhale to make the same thing happen. And that can be really helpful for things like panic attacks, where like super anxiety moments, crazy worrisome moments where you're spinning and you're out of control and you need the immediate de-escalation. For example, that's how we apply this. So super simple breathing exercise, many applications and variations. So I invite you to play with that. It's a wonderful resource now. Okay, so remember I asked you, maybe bring out that piece of pen and paper to do a little reflection. So I want to read a reflection here from Gather. And this reflection is entitled, "When I put down what is not mine to carry, I am free." When I put down what is not mine to carry, I am free. My mama's pain is not mine to carry. My daddy's suffering does not belong to me. I don't have to make my grandmama's weariness my own to maintain a connection to her. I don't have to drink from the same cup of sorrow as my granddaddy to feel like we have something in common. When I put down what is not mine to carry, I am free. Free to face the very real historic and systemic oppression that created the suffering and pain for my people without the fear. Free to access the power, courage, love, and strength of my lineage and carry it forward in a way that is boundless. Free to command justice when and where I enter. Free to call in peace with each breath. Free to summon armies of protective guides to go before, behind, and surround me. Free to pour the medicine of joy, harmony, and abundance from the ladle of my heart into the bowl of my being. free to drink deeply of the sweet nectar of my life, free to be at home wherever I am, free to walk a path of profound liberation with each step I take, free to rebuke the narrative that where and who I come from are permanently broken, free to remember how to rise and finally get on with the business of rising up, free to restore wholeness, free to stand and testify on behalf of myself and the millions who live within me that my life matters, that our lives matter. I've come to the place in my journey where it is time to release the pain and suffering of my ancestors in order to access the freedom they prayed for me, my children, and their children to have. My daily practice right now is to feel and release. I do that through writing, yoga nidra, prayer, sacred movement, and self-love. I do this by being quiet enough to hear my heart and my being brave enough to remember. My ancestors were more than pain and suffering. So am I. And here's the reflection. If that wasn't enough for you. Okay, here's your reflection question. Name one gift you inherited, tangible or not, from your family. How do you share or express that gift into the world? So I'll repeat it. Name one gift you inherited, tangible or not, from your family. How do you share or express that gift in the world? And thank you, Guy, for popping that in the chat for us. That's so helpful.
No problem. And Janine, there were a couple comments there, but you mentioned, you said, now here's the reflection. Janine said, wow, that first line was enough on that initial reading. And
it's a very powerful book, y'all. It's a gift, this book. But yeah. So as you're reflecting on this, your reflections are yours. You don't have to feel pressured to share them. If you feel inspired, go ahead and pop it into the chat. One gift you've inherited, tangible or not, from your family. And then that second question was, how do you share or express that gift in the world? And I know for me, I come from a line of teachers, and I share that gift in the world by showing up, as a teacher and a guide in the best way I can every day. I just do my best. So if you feel inspired to share yours, you feel free to pop that in the chat. We'll just give y'all another little minute here to ponder on that. And very powerful, right? It's really about the narrative, right? How we even choose to share, to take on the stories we've inherited, right? That you have power of choice to engage, to cycle and process in ways that are meaningful for you. And that was Gather by Octavia Rahim. Yeah. So keep working on that reflection. And Dee, if you wouldn't mind popping in our PowerPoint, and we will continue. We're going to kind of fold time and activities here, but and then we'll loop back around with some of these reflections as you share them. They're not going to be unheard, right? So I think it was maybe in class number 4, one of the stories that I shared was how I came to the realization that grief is a superpower. So I do all sorts of things professionally. Some of the things I do includes curriculum design, training teachers, then is like clinical healing. I have specializations in my practice around chronic conditions, autoimmune, traumatic birth experiences, women's medicine, loss, unexplainable, untreatable conditions, kind of like hardcore end of things that like, you know, you need a sort of multifaceted unicorn in your corner advocating for you, you know, and what I really and truly do is I walk with people on their transformative journeys as a spiritual friend. One of the things in my style of curriculum design is I create experiential learning experiences, learning by doing, project based. And so a lot of that, like the work I do with teens teens and young adults will be a lot about like, what are your superpowers? You know, like, no, not just what you do well, but like your superpower. And that paradigm, that kind of superhero paradigm, that like it's so prominent right now. You know, from your DC verse and your Marvel verse and your this and your that's, is that like it's a language that really clicks in, especially with young folks. This idea of superpowers, right? But if you have superpowers, then there's also kryptonite, right? It's a duality. It's a duality paradigm, and so, you know, and no, for all the like proper Marvel heads, this is not completely accurate of an analogy. It's close enough. You can catch the vibe. I've had many an argument, let me tell you, you know, of like, okay, so, you know, Superman had, you know, all the superpowers, right? And the flight and the strength and the X-ray vision and the this and the that, you know, but then there was the substance kryptonite from the planet Krypton. You know, there was something that disabled, derailed Superman, right? Now, take the actual Superman reference out of it and just the like superpowers and the kryptonite, right? That actually, what is the kryptonite? The kryptonite is a sleeping superpower. So everybody thinks that grief is bad, right? That's the inherited narrative around grief. Grief is bad. Grief it's sorrow. Get it out of here. Bypass it. Gaslight it. You know, ignore it. Get over it as fast as you can. And then every time it comes back up, question, why on earth did this thing come back up? I'm done with that loss of my job, that ending of that relationship, that, you know, death of that person, that the loss of your loved pet, you know, or the house that, you know, ended in some sort of disaster, heaven forbid. You know, I'm just saying that like we experience loss in grand form in multiple ways in our lives. What if grief is actually a sleeping superpower? What would that be to engage grief in a cyclic manner that uncovered that it's actually a superpower? So let's go to the next slide. So we had two we had two graphics that we looked at in every single one of the workshops that we've done. This is my favorite graphic of the 5 classic steps of the grief process, because what this graphic shows us is flow, movement, cyclic, that it doesn't just start in one place and end in one place. You can visit and revisit. And what I also love that's at the heart of this graphic is joy and love, empathy and hope, the superpowers of grief. Right? And so here we start, perhaps, shock, panic, denial, rage, anger, the dip down to depression and shame. Also, the interrelating matters in this as well. We could riff just on this image for a while, right? And the recovery, guilt, arrival in like acceptance, neutrality, and who knows where we may again move in this cyclic pattern, this cyclic dance of the grief process in the sort of 5 classic steps of grief. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. So what I took the opportunity to introduce you to is another framework. And this framework originates from East Asian medicine, not just China, but China, and then these ideas went diasporic in their own way. They traveled upwards into Mongolia. They traveled over into Korean Peninsula, down by waterways into even, Indonesia and Pacific side, over to Japan as well. So we'll see this kind of model in things like Chinese medicine, East Asian body work, classical Chinese medicine, TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, things like this. This is called the 5-phase model. Now, when you're looking at this, what you may be like, well, shouldn't this be called 5 elements, right? And why it's called phases is because what this concept is communicating is time. So for example, we can look at these 5 phases of metal, water, wood, fire, and earth in the form of the seasons. For example, wood is the season associated with spring, leading to fire. Remember, inhale, wood, right? The fullness of summer. Exhale. So just pause on earth for a second. We're just going to, just for a second, suspend earth. The exhale of fall, autumn season, that's metal. And then is the stillness of winter, which is water. Now, earth in the 5-phase model can be interpreted as either harvest season, meaning late summer, or earth also shows up as the space between seasons, right? Where, right now, like winter and spring can have fights sometimes. Sometimes winter wins, and all of a sudden you're in Denver and you get 8 feet of snow, right? Winter won that one, and then is like the winning of spring is those shoots pushing up, through the ground and spring emerging, and all of a sudden you're like, was that a mosquito? Like, where'd that come from? That's spring winning, right? So the in-between season, the cusp of seasons, it's such a significant experience that in this model, it gets a prominent place, right? So this is still a 4-seasonal model. I think also the importance of harvest is because, back in the day when we all had to source our own food, the harvest season is kind of so incredibly important as a phase in time that, like, I could see it having its own prominence from the imaginations that created this system, right? Remember, those were people and imaginations who are part and parcel of an environment, right? So we looked at now the emotion of grief and sorrow, like the sorrow of grief, is held in the metal phase. And what we did in this workshop series was we walked this cycle of the 5 phases by way of that 5-pointed star in the middle. We centered grief as a superpower. So we centered metal. And we looked then at the emotional expressions of grief in the form of wood, the anger of grief. So first was the sorrow of grief, metal. Then we went to wood, the anger of grief. Then we went to earth, the worry of grief. Then we went down to water, the fear and sadness of grief. Culminating in fire, the joy of grief. So isn't it interesting between these two concepts, an Eastern and a Western concept, that they share the cyclic nature of things? This internal movement, metal to wood, wood to earth, earth to water, water to fire, is called the control cycle in this concept. And when we go from fire to earth, earth to metal, metal to water, water to wood, wood to fire, the outside, that's called the creation cycle. So when we want to address healing, we look at both of these cycles and we look at, wow, are these, do these all have like a similar amount, or is there so much water? Is there so much sorrow, right? That water is then dousing fire, you know, that water is saturating wood, and then wood is too wet for fire. And so we can't access the joy, the hopefulness, the joyousness of grief because the sorrow is so heavy. Ooh, what's the balancing act, right? And then that's all these movements and breath work and vocalization practices that we learned that we can then apply in this model, right? And so you've, in the past slides, you have also had lots of access to other references, correspondence charts, things you can start playing around with. And in every workshop, I gave the reminder, this is a comprehensive medical system. We're just touching on the lightest introductory level as a whole. So keep it in mind that there's lots of things. Okay, let's go to the next slide because I wanted to share something with you here. Okay, this is a big slide. There's a lot to take in. This is a cyclic look at intergenerational trauma. But I want you to also just kind of, lately I've been loving like the backslash, where it's like, no, I'm talking about both things at once. I'm just going to backslash you, you know, healing intergenerational trauma, backslash grief. Okay. That like we inherit grief patterns. We also inherit literal grief burden. But just like what Octavia Rahim said, my mama's pain is not mine to carry. My daddy's suffering does not belong to me, right? She doesn't have to make her grandmama's weariness her own to stay connected to her, right? So while we do inherit through this very ornate system, part of the reason of why this system even exists is because there's a larger system of oppression that disconnects us all from our body wisdom and makes it inaccessible for us to reach for our ancestral grieving practices. It is not the inheritance of our ancestors. I'm going to say this and then I might rephrase it, right? That it's not our ancestral practice to avoid grieving. It is not our ancestral practice to dissociate from grief. Our ancestral practices are a lively, embodied, celebratory, loud, raucous, colorful, expressive experience of grief. And you are deserving, we are deserving to reclaim our right to grieve in the ways that are meaningful for us. So when we layer this system of intergenerational trauma, this system disconnects us from our ability to realize grief as a superpower and also to realize additionally the superpowers of our emotions, our feelings. Right. So this is deep. I mean, this is deep. You know what I mean? Okay, so let me read you from another resource. Now, this is called Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma. This is Dr. Gail Parker. This is hot off the press. Very important work in here. What she's highlighting is the paradigm of race-based trauma. Yes, we're becoming more conversant with PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Additionally, we have a racialized version of that. And the reason that we want to understand these things is because the way we're going to apply the healing tools might be slightly different. Okay, this book is amazing. Amazing. Okay, I have one paragraph I want to read to you here. So feel free to look away, or if you're still taking in this image, that's fine too. Ancestral memory is real and makes a lasting imprint. We understand that genetic inheritance influences how we look, eye color, body structure, hair texture, and skin color, illnesses we may be predisposed to, as well as our longevity. All of this exists outside of conscious awareness. But whether you know it or not, ancestral memory also resides in our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. We first learn about the world by interacting and observing family members, all of whom first learned about the world from their ancestors, traumatic retentions, and all. Ancestral memory influences your interpretation of life, your preferences, how you get your basic needs met, your perceptions of reality, how you achieve your goals, whom you love, how you love, whom you choose to be around, as well as ethnic and racial bias. Because ancestral memory tends to operate beneath conscious awareness, unless we become conscious of and recognize the traumatic patterns that originated in the history of our ancestors, we will more than likely bring them into our own lives, repeat them, and pass them on. This is true regardless of your racial identity. So we're throwing out some serious business here today. Some serious paradigms to unpack and chew on. We're dipping into the realm of epigenetics here, but what I want to really highlight is we're talking about the arrow down here that is the direction for change, right? Because if not, we're going to stay on this wheel of intergenerational trauma, grief. It's a choice. We can also choose to learn how this system has been designed, this system of oppression has been designed, how we imprint cycles, and what's the way out. And while the suffering exists in this body, the way out is not the dissociation of the mind. The way out is in this body. And then the expression of the experience of this body, mind, spirit being. So, okay, we've got a handful of minutes. Does anyone have a question, something they want to share? You could put it in the chat. You could raise your hand and be unmuted. Like there's a process like Guy told us where they'll unmute you and then you'll unmute yourself. But I wanted to save space for thoughts and questions. And I'll just put that out there.
So Yoli, this isn't directly related to this, but after the first reflection, we did have a comment that came in as we kind of got started, as you continued on, and I don't have the person's name because it's a number, actually.
Yeah.
They might not have typed their name. 32205. I come from a family of singers, and that's what they share with the world by being a worship leader in the church. So just
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, my matriarchal, and they were also singers.
Mm-hmm.
I hear you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those are the only comments at the moment,
Okay.
but I'm monitoring.
Okay. So, and I almost don't expect questions and comments because this stuff is so voluminous that you have to process. So let me talk about that.
I do have a question though.
Yes,
That just come
okay.
up. The Earth transition season is seemingly unending for me. Is there a healthy way to accelerate?
Yes. So it's really about, and then it'll also be like, Robin, which season, which cusping season we're talking about particularly. One of the most difficult cusping seasons to manage across the board is the transition from winter to spring. It's the toughest one. And why is it the toughest one? Because it's involving the most stagnation to rapid activity. So, to put that in terms of the natural world, what you have in winter is you accumulate damp. The waterways of winter are more solid. So, what you have to insert is fire. You have to warm up the stagnation, heavy dampness of winter into, so there's the expansion of spring, upward expansion of spring, of that. So what do we need? We need like lively movement, getting your heart rate up. You start lightening up the foods from like the heavy, rich, comfort food of winter to a little bit lighter, nothing crazy, but you don't want to go full raw because remember, you need fire, you need warmth. Raw is cool food, right? And then is like, what are other things? What about cleaning, right? Like spring cleaning, organizing. That's like totally intuitive response. Also, getting outside, right? And then at the same time, we want to nourish Earth, right? So still warm meals, chewing your food. That sounds funny, but like slow eating, right? Presence with the food. Literally foods that are the color of earth. Remember the meditation we did? Foods that are yellow, orange, brown. I think brown rice, sweet potatoes, right? Like this, but maybe with a little warming spice in it, maybe a little cinnamon on there to warm it up, right? So we kind of work with that. It's really about, and what we've been developing this whole series, it's the language of nature. What we've been doing is rehabilitating ourselves and reconnecting to the language of nature. Was there another question, Guy?
Not another question, but I was really resonating with with that comment, and I was like, "Wait a minute, I'm doing some of this stuff this year. Maybe that's why I feel so good." And then like those days, like yesterday, that breath of spring, like really helps. It really increases the motivation. But there is a comment I didn't want to. We have Janine who shared, "My family gift is seeing a vision and new way getting to that, and a new way to getting to that place."
Yes. And the best part is, like, these are our inherited superpowers, right? And then like when we know our superpowers and then we all start coming together and it's like, you know what? We all don't, I think it's the remedy for perfectionism because we all don't have to be perfect at everything. We can just know our superpowers, connect to them, and then come together and be in celebration of each other's superpowers. And then we have shared human experiences like grief. That grief is all our superpower.
Yeah.
Shared, right? So it's really that mindset shift, right? Once we start playing.
It was also interesting to see it. I was reflecting on some of my trauma over the time, and especially with this graphic that's up there now, the direction for change, because I was looking at the infinity one, the one that looked like the infinity symbol, and it seemed like I would always be going, and I know this wasn't the purpose, but always going back through the depression stigma cycle, which is natural. I get that, but I was thinking about some of the things that impacted me 15 years ago, and how it felt like I'd go in that cycle, but man, I haven't really had to go down that cycle. And then maybe thinking about that is, at what point did I make that direction from change? Because I've commented on, it's not really a part of me anymore. It used to define how I would introduce myself, how I would feel going into a conversation or a new relationship. Like, this happened to me and this is why I'm this. But then it stops really being so prominent. And I never had seen a graphic to kind of pull that together for me.
It's helpful, right?
Yeah,
And you did that. Like you did that work, you know?
Right.
So yeah, there is so much more that we could go into, friends.
No. Today's webinar will be another 3 hours. How does that sound?
3 hours, 3 months, 3 years.
3 months.
I mean, we could, because today we're just starting to even dip into like body constitution. Remember I said in the opening, like where you'll like see a whole like set of siblings and they all have the same kind of posture in their back, or the similar vocal quality, or we inherit so much. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, and sometimes we don't like what we find.
Yeah, right.
That's there, but the ability to transform and change and heal, it's always there. But we need helpers along the way. So I want you to think about like Team Guy and Team Yoli and Team Robin and Team 32467. Like who's in your team? Who's in your support system? Who's rallying in your corner and encouraging you to analyze, but it's not like overanalyze, too much analysis, but in essence, just observe the body in relation with the natural world.
Right.
That's the key here. That's
very cool.
The cycle.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean to cut you off, but I know we're at 1 o'clock now, so
our lunch has ended.
So our lunch is ended. I do want to tell people that on this presentation, there are several other reference slides that Yoli's included that, so when we post this online, recommend checking it out. She didn't intend to go through them as a presentation. She intended them as resources from past sessions and also today. So check those out because we didn't go through those slides. There's an ending poll that we've posted. Thank you, Dee. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out. And then what you're looking at now on your screen are our upcoming webinars the rest of this week. So I keep looking at Wednesdays where we come to the year in review. Goodness gracious, a year of daily webinars on this series, and we've been so grateful and to have presenters like Yoli come back 6-8 times, I think, overall over the last year. But gosh, can you believe it? A year in review. Can we move on, Dee? And you could go through these slides pretty quickly. I'll just kind of pop on them because I'm sure we're losing folks. Don't forget to amplify and amplify this cycle, amplify grief. Whatever you feel like amplifying, we want to promote the positive on social media if we can. So tag Be Strong Families and amplify the positive. And you can email us at covid-19@bestrongfamilies.net. If you like this series, one way you can support it and us is by purchasing a Be Strong Families mask. Those are available on our website, bestrongfamilies.org/resources. And if there's a topic that you think would be great for this webinar series, then we'd like to consider that too. You can email us. You can email Kathy at KATTHE at bestrongfamilies.net. And that's the way to get that started. We've been welcoming that all year. But yeah, that takes us to 102. Thank you again, Yoli. It's great to see you again on the Zoom vision. And any last words before we sign off?
No, just gratitude for this space. I think this is a really special space. So thank you all for coming and for, just being the hosts with mosts.
Absolutely. Hosts with the mosts. Totally. And you're the presenter with the presenter.
Yeah,
Yes.
the presenter.
The presenter with the biz and the pudding. Anyway, have a great day, everybody. Have a great rest of the week. And we thank you for coming, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.